Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Dill. It's officially game week, Sunday morning. Nothing better than sitting down, drinking a cup of coffee, previewing some of the best games that we're going to see week one of this college football season. And it's got to start with USC LSU neutral site. And Dill, you kind of said it before we went live. These two teams kind of looking in the mirror at each other, right? Both programs are replacing Heisman winning quarterbacks. Both programs are massively overturning the defensive side of the football. And both head coaches are going into year three with the programs. I mean, I think a lot of both of these programs kind of in very similar spots heading into the 2024 year, a game that is, I think, nearly impossible to predict. We're going to get into kind of some key matchups that we're looking for in this game. Now, before we get into it, and as always, let it fly in the comments section. Many of you guys who've been rocking with the boys the last couple of weeks and months and years, you guys know the rules. Let it fly in the comments section, whether you agree with the boys, whether you disagree with the boys, whether you're mixing it up with the opposing fan base. That is the beauty of doing these game predictions. So would love to hear from you guys in the comments section. Of course, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, this is one of those games that we are immediately hopping on and talking about what we just saw Sunday night. Without further ado, let's get into this one. I want to start with this LSU offense going up against the USC defense that, again, we've talked extensively in the offseason about Danton Lynn, kind of overturning this defense. But let's start with LSU replacing Jaden Daniels. What do you think this LSU offense is going to look like and try to do heading into this matchup?
I mean, I think last year you had to use Jaden Daniels, and that essentially meant you had to throw the ball a lot, and he had to be running the ball a lot. I think this offense, and Brian Kelly even kind of said it, they're going to go to more 12 personnel. I think they're going to be a much more physical, heavy playing offense that's going to rely on using those running backs to kind of grind teams into the ground. Because at the end of the day, in my opinion, the best unit on this LSU team is their offensive line, and they really should be leaning on them.
Joe Sloan is a genius. I think one of the better play call, one of the better offensive minds that we see in the country. And what makes him so good is that he knows how to look at his roster and say, all right, where are the strengths? How do we use our strengths, right? Last year was Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, and Brian Thomas. Going into 2024, you make no mistake about it. Hey, we feel great about Garrett Nussmeier. We feel really good about the wide receivers too, but where is the strength of this LSU offense? It's the offensive line. I think it's the best offensive line that we see in the country heading into 2024. And I think even more importantly, there's still some question marks about the depth and physicality that USC is going to have on the defensive line. Now, I'll say this, over the last 2 months, reading kind of the fall camp intel from USC, I think we feel better about what USC's defensive line is going to look like in 2024. But if you are Joe Sloan and Brian Kelly, you're going to want to make USC show that in terms of, hey, we're going to heavy dose of running the football. And can USC stop that? Now you look at USC, Dill, how does Danton Lynn go about stopping this LSU rushing attack?
I mean, I think a big part is can those big, long transfer corners who you brought in to kind of revamp that secondary, can they hold up without a ton of help? Because at the end of the day, if they can't get Achille Arnold or Ramsey into the box and use them in run support, because both those guys, I think that's one benefit USC has in their defense. They both kind of can come down and almost play like third or fourth linebackers in that box. So those two, I think they need to be heavily involved in the run game. And to do that, you need to be really confident that you're not just going to get torched. And that's no easy feat against LSU's offense, because they do. I know they lost some really good wide receivers, obviously, last year, but they're still really loaded and really talented.
I agree. I think that's the singular most important matchup when you're talking LSU offense, USC defense. And I think that's exactly what we're going to see, right? LSU is going to run the football. I think USC is going to respond by, hey, Achille Arnold, Kamari Ramsey, you said it best. Both are phenomenal in run support. They're going to come up into the tackle box, kind of forcing some of those one-on-one matchups. And you talk about biggest storylines of this football game. It's can guys like John Humphrey and DeCarlos Nicholson win on the outside against LSU wide receivers that I think the country's sleeping on. Nick Saban said it best on game day. You can just shake a tree in Louisiana and good wide receivers fall out of that state. LSU is going to have very good wide receivers, even if they lose Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors. That matchup is going to be fascinating. Dill, I think another storyline for USC's defense, and we talked about it a couple of days ago. So Easton Mascarenas-Arnold sounds like he's going to take over that green dot linebacker, right? He's going to be kind of calling the defense, getting that defense set. Does that help Mason Cobb just play a little bit better? I felt like there was just a little bit too much on Mason Cobb's plate in the 2023 season, especially playing next to a true freshman linebacker last year in Tackett Curtis. Does Easton Mascarenas-Arnold coming in even elevate Mason Cobb's game, because you look at USC stopping the run last year, it was abysmal. And I think a lot of it had to do with linebackers just not fitting the right gaps and playing good football.
And that will be one of the fundamental questions, because you kind of know what you have with the defensive line in USC. You probably lack some of those real big body run stuffing, two gapping kind of players, but you do have some guys who can create negative plays, guys like Bear Alexander, some of their defensive ends, they can do that. But that does put a lot of the onus, and this linebacker room needs to rise to the occasion in a way they didn't. Easton Mascarenas Arnold was a huge guy, because that's where he thrives. He's not the premier sideline to sideline, like play in space kind of guy. Not that he's like liability there, but that's not his game. He's very much a downhill in box thumper. And then Mason Cobb, whoever plays that second linebacker kind of needs to rise up and meet him, because last year they didn't get anyone.
That might be one of the biggest storylines for USC's defense in whole is do we get the version of Mason Cobb we saw at Oklahoma State? Because it was night and day different, the Mason Cobb we got in 2023. Now, I think another key to the game, and we'll say the exact same thing for this USC offense, it's red zone offense. Like, field goals are not going to win you this football game. The teams that execute better in the red zone in this matchup will win the football game. You look at LSU, you have two really good tight ends, right? Mason Taylor, but I would even talk about true freshman Trey'Dez Green. You talk about red zone threat, it doesn't get better than Trey'Dez Green. We talked about him when he committed to LSU in that 2024 cycle. He's a basketball player as well. He's probably one of the better pass catchers above the rim situations. When those throwing windows get a little bit scrunched, can you work the football to Mason Taylor and Trey'Dez Green in the red zone and make sure you're leaving with 6 and 7 points and not kicking field goals?
Yeah, and speaking of scoring touchdowns, I think part of that won't just be red zone and being able to be efficient there, because frankly, I think with their offensive line, their ability to pound the ball, and I kind of like that. I also wonder if they can just be as explosive as they were last year. If they can make teams kind of suck up and play the run and very much sell out to stop it. If they can like establish it in the way that we think they can, where if you're not playing with heavy boxes, they're just going to grind you down into the ground. I mean, that's where I think you look at a guy like Chris Hilton Jr., who to me is their premier explosive guy on the edge. I think you love what Kyron Lacey is. He's a premier route runner, really good, kind of doing some of the things I feel like almost Malik Neighbors did for them. But for me, I think when you got to replace Brian Thomas, I'm looking at Chris Hilton. Can he be that guy? Can he get over the top? If you leave him one-on-one, can he routinely kind of punish you for it? He's kind of the guy I'm looking at to do that, because I think that'll be a big part. If they can be as explosive as they were last year and incorporate more of that physicality that I think we kind of expect from them, I just don't really see what the answer is to stop it.
LSU's offense, it's going to be hard to stop for any defense in the country. Now, I think I would throw in CJ Daniels to that equation too. Average 20 yards per catch coming over from Liberty. LSU didn't run the football all that much last year, only 48% of the time. That was 91st in the country. They were number one in the country in yards per carry at 6.2 yards per carry. I'm just kind of interested to see if they can still have that rushing attack without a guy like Jaden Daniels being the quarterback. And you're pretty confident they can, because this offensive line really is you know who the lightest LSU offensive lineman is? The newest depth chart. It's Emory Jones. He's the smallest offensive. That is absolutely insane. You talk about not only good in pass pro, but this is a brutally physical offensive line that USC is going to see. Let's flip the sides here. USC offense, Miller Moss taking over. There is a lot of optimism around Miller Moss coming in at quarterback. And quite frankly, I don't blame the USC fans. I just roll out of bed and kind of trust Lincoln Riley quarterbacks to be really dang good. What does USC need to do to move the ball on an LSU defense that's very similar to USC? It is kind of going through a lot of changes here, especially on the defensive side of the football.
I think they just got to commit to being balanced. I thought last year, again, when you have Caleb Williams, it's really almost hard to take the ball out of his hands and not let him do everything. But even on RPOs, it felt like he was pretty much taking the ball every time and trying to do something with it. I look at this USC offensive line. It's honestly more built to be a bit more of a sledgehammer unit. I look at guys like Pregnon and obviously
Elijah Page,
I should say, on the left side. Like, those guys are big, physical, like attacking linemen, I think. And when they got into that routine of not really committing to running the ball, I feel like their inability to pass protect in that sort of scheme where it was just teams knew you weren't going to run it, so they were just pinning back and getting after them. They obviously weren't. They didn't look like a great unit last year, but I think it's a talented enough unit. I just think they need to be more committed to being balanced, running the ball consistently, being able to be physical, especially against an LSU defense that frankly has a ton of questions on the inside of their defense.
I think you see exactly what you just said. I mean, you go back to USC last year, they ran the football one of the least amount of times in the whole country. 42% of the time, that's 121st. But they ran the ball for almost 5 yards per carry. That was top 30 in the country. This team, when they decided to run the football last year, ran the football very effectively, but it didn't feel like they had that balance. And look, I don't make a habit of questioning Lincoln Riley and how he designs offenses. There's a reason he's getting paid the big bucks, and I'm sitting here in my basement talking into a microphone. That being said, you look at USC and say, I think they're going to be a little bit more balanced, and they're going to treat Miller Moss is a very good quarterback. And if he comes in and runs this Lincoln Riley offense, it's going to be a very successful offense, but it's going to look different than when you had Caleb Williams, right? We're going to lean on the run game. We're going to ask Miller Moss to be quick, accurate with his decision-making. I think another really big storyline is LSU was brutal last year tackling in the secondary. You have really dynamic pass catchers who not only can work vertically down the field, guys like Jacoby Lane and Deuce Robinson, but you also have a guy in Zachariah Branch who is probably the best in the country with the football in his hands. Like, can you manufacture some touches to Zachariah Branch in space and get after an LSU secondary that, hey, we think it's going to be better, the Blake Baker effect, but make them show that they can tackle in space, especially with the wide receiver like Zach Branch, who is one of the best in the game, if not the best, with the football in his hands.
Not only, I think I agree with you, not only does their mix between run and pass need to be balanced, but their ability to use every skill set in that wide receiver room, I also would like to see, because there's also that element, like LSU's got a lot of guys who, I feel like last year they didn't play the ball great in the air anyway. So it's like they had a lot of issues in that secondary. Yep. You want to, I think, try to test every facet of their game. Can they tackle? Can they play the ball in the air? And I think that's one of the benefits USC has is they have 4 young wide receivers who can all do different things. You got your Deuce Robinsons and Jacoby Lanes who can be very physical at the catch point, make guys play the ball in the air really effectively. And then you have your guys like Mekhi Lemon and Zachariah Branch who run really good routes, can make plays with the ball in their hands. I just think, to me, if USC can kind of use every skill set they have in their arsenal, which I feel like is a lot. Again, I think they can play physical bully ball a little bit with their offensive line. I think they got a lot of wide receivers who can do a lot of different things. If they can do that and test LSU in a variety of ways, I think they can, again, kind of how we talked about LSU probably has an identity that they can just go to and work teams over. I think USC, if they can get to every arsenal, if you will, I think they can be really dangerous.
I agree. Now, I think the two biggest, we'll get into our game predictions real quick, but I want to say 2 things. One, I feel like the team, I think this game's going to look a lot of different than a lot of people think. I think a lot of people are assuming this is going to be a track and field meet with football just going everywhere and kind of teams running up. I think both this USC and LSU offenses are they're going to try to run the football and kind of try to control the time possession, get to the opposing defensive line's depth, right? We're 2 biggest question marks we have for both of these defenses are the depth on the defensive line. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a slower game than I think a lot of people think. And I think it's going to come down to who runs the football and controls the time possession and then who can execute in the red zone. Like, this is a game that I think is pretty evenly matched, kind of reflected by the line here, 4.5 points. Who operates in the red zone, who controls the time of possession, probably the biggest 2 question marks you have for this football game. Dale, I'll lead it to you first here. LSU, 4.5 point favorites, neutral site, but on the West Coast in Las Vegas. How we feeling?
I got LSU, and mainly because I just don't, if they're running the ball the way I think they can and how, technically proficient, not only physically very gifted in the offensive line, but they don't miss assignments a whole lot. They've been playing together for almost 3 years now, at least the bulk of them. That unit, I just feel like, is going to be such a machine and so hard to deal with. I think they'll be consistent. I think LSU on offense is going to be really tough to stop. And then on defense, I think they'll get enough individual great plays from guys like Harold Perkins and maybe some of their defensive ends, who I think that group is really deep and really pretty good. I think they'll get enough of those big negative plays to, slow USC down. I don't think either team's going to consistently stop the other, but I think they'll get enough negative plays to.
We didn't talk about Harold Perkins, but that's a massive storyline. Like, coming out of fall camp, it sounds like Harold Perkins is very comfortable in this defense. You have arguably one of the best defenders in the country. Can he create some of those game-changing plays for LSU on defense that he just really didn't create for LSU in the 2023 season? That's really big storyline in this game, Dale. I'm going to go with USC. I think this game it's kind of a vibe play. I think a lot of people are just sleeping on this USC team. I think they're sleeping on Lincoln Riley as a head coach. Like, I feel like people forget, like, Lincoln Riley. I know Brian Kelly's a great head coach too. I have a ton of respect for both of these coaching staffs. Lincoln Riley wins a lot of football games. Yes, last year was a little dip. That was the only dip he's had as a head coach in his career. I think you see a bounce back from USC, 4.5 points. I see this game kind of coming down to who has the football last and who can execute just one more drive in the red zone. I'll take USC. I also kind of like the under because I think it's going to be a slower game. I think both defenses probably get a lot better than most people are expecting. I think a lot of people think it's going to be a shootout. I think it might look a little bit different. Give me USC. Don't feel great about it. Going to be a phenomenal football game. We'll break it down right after Sunday night. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.